I am Claudia Malatrida. I'm the Associate Vice President of Research, and it is my privilege to welcome all of you to today's events. This is the final, am I audible?
Barely.
More or less, okay. This is the final, there, that's better, right?
Yeah.
Okay, this is my, I can't even think of a pop star. Madonna. You know, it was not even popular. She's like done. Apparently, we're all done. This is the final installment, she said, getting back to the script, of the inaugural year of the Take Two Speaker Series events. And I cannot think of a more exciting and engaging capstone event. Today's scholars, who I will introduce more fully later in the program, are exemplary of the goals of the Take Two series. They are innovators, they are leaders in their field, they take on cutting-edge issues and concerns and apply their expertise to those issues with stellar results. The Take Two Speaker Series is the embodiment of what we do as researchers, creators, and scholars at the University of Lethbridge. Our work transcends methods, transcends theoretical frameworks, transcends disciplinary distinctions, and transcends local global boundaries. When I and my colleagues at the Office of Research Services sat together and conceptualized this series, we saw it as a key vehicle through which we would be able to illuminate and celebrate this kind of diversity in the approaches that we see amongst our colleagues at this university. Today's talk by two outstanding scholars highlights how these multiple approaches can lead to synergy, tension, and sometimes productive debates. And let's try and keep it productive today, if we could. It also gives us an opportunity to highlight the work of two amazing University of Lethbridge Board of Research chairs. And the University of Lethbridge Board of Research chairs are really indicative of excellence in scholarship that transcends the institutional bounds. These are our leaders. These are our best and brightest. I'm grateful to both speakers for their energy, for their insight, and to those of you who are here today not only to recognize excellence, but to lend your own voices to the Take Two conversation. So a little housekeeping before we go too much further. Obviously, the mics are a little sketchy, but we will be having a Q&A period, and we will ask you to shout out your questions because we've only got two microphones, one for each of the speakers, and we'll hold our questions if we could until after we finished with the talks. So our first speaker is Dr. Paul Vasey. He is a professor of psychology and a Tier 1 Board of Governors Research Chair in Culture, Organization, and Society at the University of Lethbridge. Over the course of his career, Dr. Vasey has sought to unravel one of the most outstanding paradoxes in the behavioral sciences. Why does male androphilia, which is male sexual attraction to adult males, not go extinct? It makes sense if you're really looking at genetic causes that you should ask such a question. Since 2003, he has conducted annual fieldwork in Samoa, a culture where transgender androphilic males are identified as a third gender, the fa'afahine. In 2015, he established a second field site in Yucatan, Mexico, where the local Zapotec people recognize androgenic androphilic males as a third gender as well, this time Muxe. His research has been highlighted in National Geographic TV, the Discovery Channel, and the Nature of Things, and has been reported in such august venues as the New York Times, Playboy, I don't know if that's August, maybe I should take that back, and Oprah. Let's give a very warm round of applause to Paul Vasey.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Are you sure?
All right. It should be work. Yeah. Okay, there we go. Okay, so thank you, everyone, for coming here today. I'm kind of shocked by the turnout, particularly in light of the weather. So, having just driven over here, before I even start speaking, I just want to say, everybody drive really, really carefully when you go home because the roads are absolutely treacherous. So, So, as Claudia said, I'm a professor and a Board of Governors research chair here at the university in the Department of Psychology, and my research, it's comparative in perspective. It's I do research on other species, Japanese monkeys. I've studied female homosexual behavior in Japanese monkeys for years. But I also do human research, so cross-cultural research in places like Samoa, and in a place called Uchitan, which is in the Istmo region of southern Mexico, Oaxaca, sort of that part of the Mexican peninsula that sort of pinches together before it expands out again. So what sort of ties my cross-cultural work together is that I work in these cultures that recognize more than two genders. So they recognize individuals that are neither men nor women. So in the 1990s, there was this steady stream of books that was coming out of academia that were focused on looking at non-Western cultures that recognize the existence of these non-binary individuals. So with few exceptions, these books, they dealt with natal males, so biological males that were same-sex attracted and feminine, and who were identified by the individuals in their culture, and they identify themselves as being neither men nor women, but some sort of third or alternative gender, something that in contemporary Western society we would talk about as being a non-binary individual. So these books were, the other thing that's important in terms of what I'm going to say today is that all of these books that are representative of the sort of scholarship that was coming out in the 90s were published by gay men, gay male academics. And the first sort of exemplar, one of the earlier exemplars, was by Walter Williams. It was a really, really interesting book that actually sparked my interest in these kinds of cultures, called The Spirit in the Flesh. And it focused on Native North American gender and sexual diversity and these non-binary individuals in Native North American culture, which at the time were referred to as Berdache, but which is sort of this, they're now referred to as Two-Spirit, but each North American cultural group had specific names for these non-binary individuals. Okay, so all this research is coming out in the 90s. And then in 2003, the writer and activist Pat Califia published this book called Sex Changes. And in it there was this essay, it was a collection of essays, and in it there was this essay entitled The Berdache Wars and Passing Women, Transphobia in Gay Academia. And Califia argued that gay scholars were appropriating these non-Western, non-binary individuals to prove the universal existence of homosexuality. So she was saying they were appropriating these non-binary individuals from non-Western cultures to sort of shore up the idea that male homosexuality existed cross-culturally and trans-historically. And so, of course, the implication here in reading Califia's work was that linking non-Western, non-binary individuals to gay men was transphobic, because these individuals really, according to Califia, had more in common with Western transsexuals than they do with gay men. And at the, just to give you a bit of background about Califia, at the time of writing, she identified as a butch lesbian and a vocal member of the sadomasochistic leather community in San Francisco. And for a time, she was also a member of the lesbian and separatist community in San Francisco. And subsequently, she underwent hormone replacement therapy, and she now identifies as a bisexual trans man. And if you get, this is the copy of the book that I purchased back when it was first published, but if you buy a copy nowadays, the author is listed as Patrick Califia. So I thought, given that I just kind of wanted to do something new with today's talk, because I've given quite a few talks recently, so that's why I framed this particular talk in terms of this debate. And I thought that I'd speak briefly about, I thought I'd speak briefly about the work I conduct in Samoa and in the Istmo region of Oaxaca, Mexico, because I thought it might inform this debate about the issues of appropriation by gay scholars. So in Samoa, I work with the Fa'afafine community, and in Oaxaca, I work with the Muxe community with that guy over there, my student, Francisco Gomez, who's critical to getting this work done. But don't tell him I said that. So, who are the Fa'afafine and the Muxe? Well, they're biological or natal males, just like gay men. And they're also, in adulthood, their sexual orientation could be described as androphilic. And androphilia just means sexual attraction to adult males. More specifically, so they're androphilic just like gay guys, but more specifically, just like gay guys, they're attracted to masculine adult males. Okay, you can be a feminine adult male, but most gay guys and most Muxe and most Fa'afafine are not attracted to feminine adult males, they're attracted to masculine ones. So they share this pattern of attraction with gay men, but not with, interestingly enough, not with most Western male to female transsexuals who, according to the literature, according to the best sort of surveys we have, are not androphilic, but tend to be non-androphilic, so gynophilic or bisexual or expressing their sexuality in some other non-androphilic way. And as well, the other thing about, so they're natal males, they're androphilic in adulthood, and obviously, you can see by looking at them, they're feminine. In some cases, they're feminine to the point where, through a Western lens, we would refer to them as transgender, although that's not a word that is necessarily used in these particular cultures. Oftentimes, if you refer to them as being transgender, they wouldn't even recognize that word. So they're feminine, sometimes to the point where we would call them transgender. But if you spend any time in these cultures, you recognize that there's a whole spectrum of gender role presentation, from unremarkably masculine, although tends to be more of a minority in the case of Samoa, to remarkably feminine, the point where they, to many Western observers, you wouldn't even recognize them as being a third gender or non-binary individual. And it's important to note that although these individuals are on, you can tell by looking at them, although these individuals are on average more feminine than, let's say, the typical gay guy, if we can say I'm typical. So they're on average, they're more feminine than the typical gay guy. But it's important to note that gay guys are on average more typical than the average straight guy. Mm-hmm. So male femininity per se doesn't distinguish gay men from Zapotec, Muxe, and Samoan Fa'afafine. Rather, you can think about male androphilia as existing on a spectrum of gender role presentation, and this spectrum exists in all cultures, and it ranges from individuals that are extremely masculine, and they're the minority, to individuals that are extremely feminine. And depending on the culture you're in, they could be either a minority or they could be a substantial part of the androphilic male population. So what differs across cultures is how this male femininity is interpreted. In its more extreme forms, like what we see here, highly feminine males, some non-Western cultures like Samoa and the Istmo Zapotec, they interpret this kind of male femininity as reflecting this individual isn't a man, they're something else, they're a third gender. Whereas in the West, this kind of extreme male femininity is viewed in more binary terms, where the individual is no longer a man, they're either identified as a woman or a trans woman. And so just to get back to this debate about appropriation, and is it really appropriate to make comparisons between gay men and these kind of non-binary individuals in non-Western society? Much of my work has done that. So I guess I'm guilty of making those sorts of comparisons. Let's look at what some of the data demonstrate. Whether these comparisons show that these individuals are similar, these groups are similar, Western gay guys, Muxe, Fa'afafine, or whether they're really different. Whether we're dealing with differences that are differences in degree, or whether we're dealing with categorically different sets of human beings. So I've done lots and lots of work on this, and I'm going to just take you through a few of the highlights. So in childhood, regard both types, gay guys and Muxe and Fa'afafine, they all exhibit elevated cross-sex wishes. So the childhood cross-sex wishes do not distinguish these groups. I'm not saying that every gay guy experienced cross-sex wishes in childhood, but there's very, very elevated rates of cross-sex fantasies, cross-sex wishes, cross-sex beliefs among boys that will go on to be gay men as adults. So cross-sex wishes can't cleanly distinguish these various types of groups. And most boys, most male children who experience cross-sex wishes in the West, they're going to go on to grow up to be gay men. So the argument that, well, what really differentiates these groups is that they feel like they're the other sex, that the data don't really support that. Cross-sex wishes occur at a relatively high rate among gay men. In terms of adulthood, and again, there's tons and tons of research here, I'm just sort of flying through to keep to the time limit, but in terms of adulthood, there's a lack of interest among Muxe and Fa'afafine in terms of modifying their bodies. So for example, the data I have from Samoa indicates that 76% of the Fa'afafine show no interest in modifying their bodies, either surgically or hormonally. And this is when I tell them, I pose the question like this: if I paid for everything, and if there were no medical complications, would you do this? 76% say no, I'm not interested. I'm happy with the way things are. So just like gay guys, they're not interested, the vast majority, in modifying their bodies in adulthood. There are exceptions, of course, but we're talking about the majority. And if we look at biodemographic correlates, again, we've done lots of work on this, but I'm just going to present one of our findings. There's similar population prevalence rates among gay men in the West and Muxe. Francisco just published a paper a few weeks ago, I think. And Samoa. Population prevalence rates for gay guys in the West, and Fa'afafine in Samoa, and Muxe in the Istmo region of Oaxaca, it's all about 2 to 3%. I mean, there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but about 2 to 3%. Whereas the population prevalence rate for Western transsexuals, it's about 0.0001. So huge differences in population prevalence rates that suggest that these non-Western, non-binary individuals are more closely related to gay men, at least in terms of these particular measures. So on the basis of, that's my research assistant in Samoa, that's Trisha. I show her picture every opportunity I get. She's great. She's a Fa'afafine. So on the basis of these results, I've argued that these two types, these individuals are both androphilic. They're two different types of androphilia. One's transgender, the other's cisgender. I've argued that these two types of androphilia are just variations on the same theme. In other words, they differ in degree, not in kind, and as such, they're not categorically different types of human beings. Our work suggests that their androphilia stems from the same biological potential, but how this potential is elaborated upon, whether it's elaborated upon in a transgender or a cisgender manner, it really depends on the culture in which they're socialized. In Samoa, this biological potential is channeled into the transgender form. In Canada, it's channeled into the cisgender form. So little pre-gay boys, they masculinize in as much as they're capable of doing so. If I'd grown up in Samoa, I'd look more like Trisha, including the wig. If Trisha had grown up in Canada, she'd look more like me. That biological potential would get elaborated upon differently. And that's not to say that these different types of male androphiles, and this is important, it's not to say that these different types of male androphiles don't differ in important social ways. Obviously they do. They have different identities. One identifies as a gay guy, a gay man. One identifies as a fa'afafine and not a man. And they have different gender role enactments. One dresses more masculine, one dresses more feminine, and there's all sorts of social ramifications for that in terms of social responsibilities within the family and the community, or lack thereof. So in light of these social differences, they're recognized, both these individuals are recognized both in Samoa and in Canada as being different types for social reasons. But I've shown you that there's lots of sort of biological reasons why they're similar. But socially, they're recognized as being categorically different. In Samoa, this guy's recognized as a man, not a gay man, just a man. This individual is recognized as a fa'afafine. If Trisha came to Canada, this guy would be recognized as a gay guy. Trisha would be recognized maybe as a transgender woman or a transgender person. But I want to emphasize that this Western way, or Samoan way for that matter, of treating these individuals as categorically different, it's not cross-culturally universal. If we move to the Istmo Zapotec, both of these individuals are androphilic here. This is Julio, our research assistant down there. This is one of the leaders of the Muxe community, Felina, who helps us an enormous amount as well. Both Muxe, they're both recognized as being Muxe. So they're, within that cultural context, they're not treated as categorically different kinds of people. They're treated as variations on a theme. One is Muxe Guna, Muxe woman. One is Muxe Ngiu, Muxe man. So this idea that we're treating, for example, gay guys and androphilic, transgender, non-binary individuals as categorically different, it's not, it's a Western way of thinking about the world, but it's not the only way of thinking about the world. There are other models. So in closing, 2 minutes, I'll catch my breath. So, in closing, in response to Calipia's charges of appropriation, I'd say the following. Fa'afafine and Muxe, they're not direct analogs of gay men, but equally, they are not direct analogs of Western transsexuals, especially those Western male to female transsexuals that are not androphilic, or those Western female to male transsexuals. They're not analogs of gay men, they're not analogs of Western transsexuals. They share things in common with them, but they're not photocopies or direct copies of those Western phenomena. So that being said, Fa'afafine and Muxe, they do share much in common with Western gay men, and in some respects, depending on the measure you're using, the kinship they share with Western gay men is closer than the kinship they share with many types of Western transsexuals. And with that, I just want to thank you for your time and thank these funding agencies. All right, shall I get off the stage? Is that good? Yeah? All right.
All right, so thank you very much, Paul. Our second speaker, Suzanne, Dr. Suzanne L, I'll do it right this time, is Associate Professor and Chair, you're Chair of the, sorry, I spelled your life, the Women and Gender Studies Department. She's also a University of Lethbridge Tier 2 Board of Governors Research Chair in Culture, Organization, and Society. Yeah, I didn't know that. You never knew the title, I know. We like to keep it a secret. Dr. Lenon's work on race, sexuality, and the law has been published broadly, and she's a co-editor with Alicia, right?
Yep, thank you.
H. Dryden of Disrupting Queer Inclusion, Canadian Homo-Nationalisms and the Politics of Belonging with UBC Press in 2015. Her current research project focuses on the topic of inheritance, further supported by a Center for Oral History and Traditions Faculty Research Award. as well as a research grant from the Glasgow Society for the Canadian Legal History. So welcome, Suzanne, and thank you so much.
These things make me nervous.
You need a hand with that? Or?
Probably, but I'm okay. Is that okay? Can you hear me?
It is good.
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to make the caveat that as my students know, my PowerPoints are never sexy. So you're going to have to bear with me. So first of all, I want to thank you, Claudia and Research Services, there you are, for organizing this whole series. It's a really, really terrific idea. And thank you all for coming out today, despite this weather. I actually want to just begin by acknowledging the land that we're gathering on today is Blackfoot territory. And this is important to state because gender, sex, and sexuality were and are key facets in the labor of settler colonialism. And so to acknowledge the land that we're on is also to acknowledge the conditions in which those of us who situate ourselves in that field work. So that's the beginning. Okay, so of these three categories, gender, sex, and sexuality, my focus of research over the past decade or so has been on sexuality, particularly non-normative queer sexualities and the politics of recognition and inclusion. I want to make the caveat, though, that I don't imagine sexuality to be neatly parsed out from sex gender, but rather understand the three as historically specific configurations that are densely entangled with one another and in relations of power, other relations of power. Discourses of sexuality and the identity categories and subject positions they give rise to are always already embedded in socially produced notions of sex gender, where, for example, oppositional desire is part and parcel of the ideal itinerary of normative gender identity. In other words, the social meanings invested in sex gender cannot be untangled from norms of compulsory heterosexuality. So with that caveat, my approach to the study of sexuality is feminist and is queer in its orientation and in its sensibilities. I try to make space for the unruly. That is, my work pays attention to the interlocking relations of power that work with and through sexuality to configure norms of recognition, to shape life possibilities, to distribute vulnerability and security, to deem some bodies less than human, disposable, or even unassimilable in liberal regimes of rights and representations. In particular, my work both pays attention and draws attention to sexuality's historical and persistent entanglement with race and whiteness as a relation of power. My site of study has been marriage law, which is a normative edifice, if there ever was one, for defining meanings of sex, gender, and sexuality. And it's but one route through which the state disciplines, manages, and regulates intimacies in the service of nation building. Sexuality, intimacies, and kinship are never only private matters. They might be thought of as intimate publics. So here's just an example. Okay, how do I do this? Okay, yay. So to mark Canada's 150th year of Confederation, Canada Post issued a series of stamps about kind of key national moments over the past 50 years. And so this particular stamp commemorates the passage of the Civil Marriage Act, which legalized same-sex marriage across Canada in 2005. So you see on the flag with the rainbow, and it has marriage equality in both English and French. So regardless of where you stand on this issue, it's hard to deny the significance of this victory for a group of people who were once classified as dangerous sexual offenders and considered a threat to national security, who now have the legal capacity to walk into City Hall and to apply for a marriage license, right? And not only are some of us no longer a threat to national security, but we were actually called patriots by the Prime Minister in his apology that he gave to lesbians and gay men last November. So this stamp is representative of a particular kind of Canadian nationalism that imagines Canada and what it means to be Canadian. Diverse, inclusive, respectful of human rights. As a commodity that enables the cross-border travel of paper and packages, it serves as a metonym of Canada as modern, thus a safe haven in the face of homophobia elsewhere, not here. But this stamp, I would also say, does more than signal a victorious moment of white settler nation making. It also marks the indelible role of marriage law in profoundly shaping and governing the body politic and its intimacies. As Foucault reminds us, sexuality exists at the point where the body and the population meet. And this insight and his theorization of biopolitical power, one concerned with the life and the health of the population, so kind of the macro, sheds light on the whys of state concern about people's intimacies, about who's having sex with who, about people's sexual practices. So what kinds of sexuality are in the service of the nation, or which kinds of sexuality threaten the nation, are biopolitical questions, and so necessarily fold sexuality into matters of race. So one set of non-normative, and we might actually even say queer, sexual and kinship arrangements that is currently of biopolitical concern is that of polygamy. And so I want to actually, take one a couple of years back in my research, but I want to speak to some of the research that I've done about this, around this issue as a way just to illustrate how I approach the study of sexuality. And I guess generally I would just kind of put out there that it's this network of the national, the biopolitical, and the colonial that I take as my constellation and my points of orientation within this field of sexuality studies. For this particular research project that was over a few years, my methodology was a combination of archival work, both at the Galt and at the archives in Ottawa, as well as feminist discourse analysis of legal texts. Okay, so following several decades of police investigations into the community of Bountiful, right, in southeastern BC, criminal charges of polygamy were pressed against the two male leaders of this community in 2009. These charges were subsequently dismissed, and in response to that, the Attorney General of BC asked the Supreme Court of British Columbia to assess the constitutional validity of the criminal code provision on polygamy through a reference case. And so one of the main points of consideration was whether Section 293 is consistent with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In November of 2011, Chief Justice Bauman released his 300-page plus decision that found that actually Section 293 does violate freedom of religion guaranteed under Section 2A, but that this is justifiable because the intrinsic harm polygamy is said to pose to women, to children, and to the institution of monogamous marriage. So he unequivocally asserted that the state does have a place in the bedrooms of the nation, right? No, he says that, to defend the institution of monogamous marriage from attack by polygamy. So with one small revision, namely that Section 293 can't criminalize minors who engage in plural marriage, Chief Justice Bauman determined that Canada's anti-polygamy provision is valid and enforceable. And there's so much that's fascinating about this judicial opinion. How the court handled competing truth claims and knowledge production about polygamy's harms. There's a super interesting subtext of gendered property going on. But really, I think when it comes down to it, in many ways, it's as much a judicial opinion on monogamy as it is on polygamy. It's a doubling down on the institution of monogamous marriage and monogamy as the normative way to organize our sexual lives and our kinship and family relations. So just to give a couple of examples, and I hope you have some wine with you here. So monogamous heterosexual marriage was presented by some of the expert evidence as making, quote, men, so this is monogamous heterosexual marriage, men much less likely to commit crimes such as murder, robbery, and rape. And that monogamous marriage suppresses men's criminality. So in other words, it civilizes men. But what's interesting about this is those were actually almost exact same arguments that conservative white gay men in the US were making in their support of same-sex marriage, that same-sex marriage will civilize gay men. The court also sided with expert evidence that claimed, okay, hold on to your seats, that claim that the institution of monogamous marriage is naturally designed to respect gender equality. So gender equality here isn't understood as the outcome of fierce feminist legal, social, and political struggle, but rather is produced as an inherent feature of monogamous marriage. Now, the Chief Justice conceded that monogamous marriage is not a uniformly positive experience for everyone, and because he talks about violence against women, but in so doing remarks that these facts seem, quote, beside the point. And so what happens is that the harms, the very real harms that are associated and happen in monogamous marriage can't be addressed, right? It sets up polygamy or polygamous marriage and monogamous marriage as these polar opposites, right? So that there's very little room for the exploration of complexities on both sides of the binary. So if we're talking about gender equality, it was stated in the reference that the aversion, the historical aversion to polygamous marriage in the West and in Canada, has always been seen as addressing the risk of harm to women and children. But the handful of, I think it's about 6 or 7 Canadian cases that have interpreted the polygamy offense don't mention that objective at all, right? Moreover, Section 293 is in fact punitive to women as it applies to anyone over the age of 18, right? In other words, women too can be criminally charged under Section 293. And feminist legal scholars and advocates have expressed serious reservation that this may in fact impede women from leaving abusive polygamous marriages. As a whole, I'm going to go for my time. Okay. This reference decisively situates monogamous marriage as the bedrock of civilization, of Western civilization. Section 293 for Justice Bauman was and is a way for Parliament to draw a bright line, in his words, to reflect the primacy of monogamous marriage to Western culture. So the reference strikes me as an anxious piece of legal writing. White anxiety about sex and reproduction, both of populations and about Canadian and Western values, about immigration, about a theorized decline in national wealth and our GDP, and increased crime rates if polygamy were to be decriminalized. All of these are biopolitical concerns, right, where the social body must be defended against the degeneracy of polygamy. And here's where the interlock of sexuality and race comes alive, right? Although the impetus for the reference was on the long-standing concerns about the white Mormon community and polygamous community of Bountiful, this reference traffics in the specter of contagion and the spread of polygamy if it were to be decriminalized. So that a non-trivial increase was posited to be, quote, quite plausible, given that it could, quote, catch on in a complex society such as Canada. And this fear of contagion and spread is particularly acute with respect to racialized populations. This is really where it gains its power and its hold. So he, in the first instance, Bauman found that Canada would become a primary destination for people from Africa and the Middle East if it were to be decriminalized, and secondly, that decriminalization would lead to the possibility of an increase among those who are already here. It does not call those people Canadians, but rather people from cultures and faiths which practice polygyny, who are already resident, who might take it up were it not prohibited, right? And then the logic is that higher fertility rates in polygynous communities would mean that their population demographics expand faster than, I guess, monogamous Canadian population. So it requires no leap of our critical imagination to see at work in these statements the image of the racial other assailing Canada's border. It's from within and beyond the border, yet always invariably in sight of it, that the imagined return of barbarism haunts the regulation of polygamy. This reference reinvests, in fact, it reanimates and breathes new life into the 19th century logic of cultural difference, of us and them, that colonialism thrives on. And this reference follows a well-worn path of the racial logics that haunt the histories of anti-polygamy laws in North America. Polygamy has a long association with racialized foreignness, and this is not of another time, but is animated in our historical present. Indeed, the reference's overdetermined line of racialized spatial difference is hard to miss. And I might evocatively suggest that this section 293, as Bauman's bright line, is also the color line. So the task then, as this court sees it, is to make sure that the environment in Canada remains hostile to polygamy. What the federal government, 3 years after this reference decision, would call protecting Canada and protecting Canadians from, quote, barbaric cultural practices, which was legislatively articulated in Bill S7, which amended various pieces of existing legislation to deal with issues such as forced marriage, polygamy, and honor killing. Okay. So thinking about sexuality through racialized relations of power, this racialized discourse of contagion interlocks with the civilizational logic of empire in a post-9/11 geopolitical context, with fear of the other as Muslim. And we see circulating in the polygamy reference and even feminist texts that were produced around this issue and House of Commons debates over Bill S7, the figures of what Shireen Razak has called the quote-unquote dangerous Muslim man, imperiled Muslim women, and the civilized Canadian, where gender inequality stands as a barometer of the backwardness of other cultures, not ours. But again, what's interesting, you guys, is that bountiful just kind of disappears in all this. It just kind of fades away. And so a couple of examples. So when the whole thing was going down, when Blackmore and Oler were being charged in 2009, kind of in the late 2000s there, the then Federal Minister of Justice was asked to comment about the situation in Bountiful. And in their speaking brief, there's just this really super rapid transition to Muslims, polygamy in Muslim communities, and immigration. And Bountiful just kind of goes off. Doesn't even talk about it. When Chris Alexander, who was the Minister for Citizenship and Immigration under the Harper government, when he was announcing Bill S7, he said that, and saying that Canada won't tolerate, so-called barbaric cultural practices on Canadian soil, there's absolutely no mention of Bountiful, like none. So something's going on. And it's worth noting that this phrasing of Canadian soil was repeated 6 times in the minister's 12-minute speech, right? So to make any statement about protecting Canadian soil from the barbarism of polygamy, one must center settler colonialism, because that's the only way that Canadian soil exists as a concept. The discourse of barbaric cultural practices from elsewhere, so over there, not here, coming into Canada and threatening our values of gender equality, for example, conceals the gendered violence required to make Canada in the first place, right? Far from violence against women being a contradiction of Canadian values, Canada's existence is a product of, and indeed relies on, ongoing violence against Indigenous women and girls. And for that, I would specifically direct you to the phenomenal work of Mohawk scholar Audra Simpson and her forthcoming book, as well as her online talk, The Chief's Two Bodies. Settler colonialism is present precisely when it appears not to be, given that its normative function is to appear complete. In this sense, that Bountiful is settled on unceded Ktunaxa territory has to remain unspoken in order for the legitimacy of Canadian soil to make sense in the speech. And we might also consider how Bountiful's bad and excessive patriarchal relations are assuaged in part through its whiteness. And I know I'm getting there, okay. So it's against this backdrop of biopolitical anxieties over immigration, sex, and reproduction that we see the unfoldment of the lesbian and gay subject into the labor to preserve the primacy of monogamous marriage and therefore Western civilization, right? And you guys, this comes from the unlikeliest of sources. You'll never guess, the conservative women's organization, REAL Women, who have, if you know them, they've long been opposed to same-sex marriage. They have, they're deeply believe in the patriarchal heterosexual family as the privileged site for raising children. They lobbied against the legalization of same-sex marriage because they believed that it would lead to the unraveling of society, and I'm not being polemic, like that's what they say. But here, as an intervener in the polygamy reference, they say that there's actually no evidence of harm associated with same-sex conjugal unions, right? And that there's actually substantial functional overlap with opposite-sex conjugal unions. And so I don't think we should take this to mean that REL Women is going to be marching in the gay pride parade soon, but rather that there's a whole range of actors that were kind of called into this work around rendering monogamy and monogamous marriages as normative, as the normative family and sexual and intimate form in Canada, right? And Justice Bauman, too, when he was writing about this bright line, says that same-sex relationships, in his words, celebrate all of the values that we seek to preserve and advance in monogamous marriage. Now, although he doesn't explicitly outline which values those are, we might surmise that these cohere around what polygamy is uniformly believed not to entail: individualism, romantic love, consent, privacy, relations of contract, and autonomy. So I need to wrap up, but as you can tell, this is a type of research and conversation that is not really wrap-upable, so to speak. So I just want to end with a quick series of short questions, right? Because the entry of polygamous families that, on TV shows and culture and our legal arena pose really difficult questions for transformative feminist politics, transformative queer politics and scholarship. Right, so how do queer feminist legal advocates engage with criminal interventions that enforce a law of monogamous conjugality? Would the decolonization of law necessitate the decriminalization of polygamy, given the way that the criminal code has been used in the service of settler colonialism? Can we not continue to push sexuality studies to attend to the interlocking relations of power that constitute us all, that constitute our relations with one another, and constitute our imaginings of gender, sexual, and racial justice? I'm done.